The rain hammered against the hospital window as I sat beside my mother's bed, listening to the steady beep of machines that had become the soundtrack of our family's slow disintegration. Her frail hand lay motionless in mine, the same hand that had once braided my hair for school pictures and wiped away my tears when kids made fun of my secondhand clothes. Now, at 73, Mama was slipping away from me, and with each labored breath, I felt the weight of 42 years of being the family's invisible caretaker pressing down on my chest like a stone. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The ICU smelled of antiseptic and false hope. I'd been here for 6 days straight, sleeping in this uncomfortable chair, living off vending machine coffee and the occasional sandwich from the cafeteria. My siblings? Well, that's a story for another time. Actually, no, that's the story I'm about to tell you right now. Mama's eyes fluttered open, focusing on me with difficulty. The stroke had stolen so much from her, her speech, her mobility, her dignity, but in those cloudy blue eyes, I could still see the woman who had raised 6 children on a waitress's salary after Daddy left us when I was 12. "Opal," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the mechanical symphony surrounding us. "My sweet girl." I leaned closer, my heart breaking at how small she looked in that hospital bed. This was the woman who had seemed invincible to me as a child, who worked double shifts at the diner and still managed to help me with homework every night, who sacrificed her own dreams so that her children could have a chance at something better. "I'm here, Mama," I whispered back, squeezing her hand gently. "I'm not going anywhere." Her eyes clouded with what looked like regret, and she struggled to form words. "The others, where?" I didn't have the heart to tell her that Marcus, my older brother who lived 30 minutes away, hadn't visited once since she'd been admitted. That Denise, my younger sister, who used to be Mama's favorite, had sent flowers with a card but claimed she was too busy with her real estate career to come see her own dying mother. That Jerome and Candace had both promised to drive up from Atlanta but kept finding excuses to postpone their visits. That even Tommy, the baby of the family who Mama had bailed out of trouble more times than I could count, was supposedly too overwhelmed with his new job to make the 2-hour drive. They're handling things their own way," I lied, brushing a strand of gray hair from her forehead. "You know how they are." But Mama wasn't fooled. She'd always been able to see right through our family's dysfunction, even when she pretended otherwise. Her grip on my hand tightened with surprising strength for someone so frail. "Opal Jean," she said, using my full name the way she did when she had something important to say. "You've always been my strongest. Don't let them." Her voice trailed off as exhaustion overtook her, but I understood what she was trying to say. "Don't let them walk all over you. Don't let them take advantage of your kindness. Don't let them treat you like garbage the way they always have." If only I had listened to that warning. If only I had understood then what I was about to discover about the family I'd spent my entire adult life protecting and supporting. If only I had known that in the next few weeks, I would learn just how disposable I really was to the people who shared my blood. I am Opal Jean Harris, and this is the story of how I spent 4 decades being my family's doormat, before I finally learned to sweep them out of my life like the dirt they always treated me as. Growing up as the middle child in a family of 6 kids taught me early that love was earned through service. While my older siblings Marcus and Denise got attention for their achievements, and my younger siblings Jerome, Candace, and Tommy got coddled for their youth, I found my place by being useful. I was the one who helped Mama with dinner every night, who made sure the younger kids did their homework, who worked part-time jobs starting at 14 to help with household expenses. When Daddy walked out on us in 1993, leaving Mama with 6 kids and a mountain of debt, I was the one who stepped up. At 16, I dropped my plans for college and took a full-time job at Henderson's hardware store, so Mama wouldn't have to work 3 jobs instead of 2. I told myself it was temporary, just until we got back on our feet. I told myself I was being noble, sacrificial, the responsible one. Marcus, who was 2 years older than me, somehow managed to keep his college plans intact. "Someone has to get an education in this family," he said when I questioned why he couldn't work instead. "You're good with your hands, Opal. You don't need a degree." Even at 18, Marcus had mastered the art of making his selfishness sound like logic. Denise, who was 3 years younger, was the pretty one, the charming one, the one who could talk her way out of any responsibility. While I stocked shelves and counted inventory at Henderson's, Denise focused on her grades and her social life. Opal doesn't mind working, she'd tell Mama when asked to contribute. She likes feeling important. The twisted thing was, part of me did feel important. Being needed felt like being loved. The younger three, Jerome, Candace, and Tommy, learned early that Opal would take care of everything. When they needed money for school supplies, they came to me. When they needed rides to friends' houses or help with projects, they came to me. When they got in trouble and needed someone to cover for them or bail them out, they came to me. I became less of a sister and more of a combination ATM, taxi service, and emergency contact. Mama tried to intervene sometimes. Opal, you can't do everything for everyone, she'd say after I'd worked a double shift to pay for Tommy's car insurance, or covered for Candace when she wrecked her bicycle and lied about it. But Mama was exhausted, overwhelmed, barely keeping her head above water. When I took care of things, it meant one less problem for her to worry about, so she let it happen. By the time I was 25, this dynamic was so ingrained that nobody questioned it anymore. I lived in a small apartment above Henderson's Hardware, where Mr. Henderson had eventually made me assistant manager. I drove a 10-year-old Honda Civic and wore clothes from discount stores because most of my paycheck went to family emergencies. Emergency tuition payment for Jerome when his financial aid fell through. Emergency car repair for Marcus when he couldn't afford to fix his transmission. Emergency bail money for Tommy when he got arrested for underage drinking. I told myself I was building something important. That I was the glue holding our family together. That someday, when everyone was successful and stable, they'd remember what I'd sacrificed for them. That the love and gratitude would come eventually. When I turned 30, I finally started dating seriously. His name was David Kingston, and he was a customer at the hardware store who needed help with a kitchen renovation. David was patient, kind, and completely baffled by my family dynamics. "Why don't they ever help you?" he asked after watching me cancel our third date to drive 2 hours and pick up Candace from a college party where she'd gotten too drunk to drive herself home. "They're family," I explained, as if that answered everything. "Family takes care of each other." "But who takes care of you?" David asked, and I didn't have an answer for that. David and I dated for 2 years before he finally gave me an ultimatum. "I love you, Opal, but I can't compete with your family for your attention. You're so busy being everyone's savior that you don't have anything left for yourself, let alone for us." When I chose to drive to Atlanta to help Jerome move apartments instead of going to David's company Christmas party, he ended things. I told myself he just didn't understand family loyalty. Now I realize he was the only person who'd ever tried to show me what healthy boundaries looked like. The pattern continued through my 30s. I dated occasionally, but no relationship could survive the constant interruptions and financial drain of my family's never-ending crises. I watched friends get married, buy houses, build careers and families of their own, while I remained stuck in the same small apartment, the same job, the same role as the family's perpetual helper. Mama and I were close during these years, closer than I was with anyone else. She was the only one who seemed to notice my sacrifices, who thanked me for my help, who worried about my happiness. "You're too good to us, Opal Jean," she'd say sometimes. "You need to live your own life." But when the next crisis hit, and there was always a next crisis, she'd call me first. Because she knew I'd come. Because I always came. When I turned 40, I made a resolution to start saying no more often. To set some boundaries. To maybe take a vacation for the first time in 15 years. I'd saved up enough money for a trip to Savannah, a place I'd always wanted to visit. I'd requested the time off work and was looking forward to a week of doing absolutely nothing but reading books and walking on the beach. 2 days before my trip, Marcus called. His business was failing, and he needed $15,000 to avoid bankruptcy. "I wouldn't ask if it wasn't desperate," he said. "You know I'm good for it. I'll pay you back with interest as soon as things turn around." I canceled my vacation and emptied my savings account. Marcus never paid me back. His business failed anyway 6 months later, and he moved to a bigger city to quote, "start fresh." The money I'd given him had simply delayed the inevitable, while eliminating my chance at the first real break I'd planned for myself in decades. That's when something started shifting inside me. Not anger exactly, but a growing awareness that I was the only one sacrificing anything in this family. Everyone else seemed to navigate their lives with the comfortable knowledge that Opal would handle whatever they couldn't or wouldn't handle themselves. But I buried these feelings, told myself I was being selfish, reminded myself that family was supposed to come first. I had no idea that I was about to discover just how little that loyalty meant when the roles were finally reversed. The first real crack in my perfect family facade appeared during Denise's housewarming party in 2019. She'd bought a beautiful colonial in the suburbs, complete with a 3-car garage and a backyard that looked like something from a magazine. Her real estate career had taken off, and she was making more money than the rest of us combined. I'd driven 3 hours to attend the party, bringing an expensive kitchen gadget I'd saved up for, and taking time off work I couldn't afford to lose. The house was filled with Denise's new friends, other real estate agents, young professionals, people who drove cars that cost more than I made in 2 years. I was standing in her gorgeous kitchen, admiring the granite countertops and stainless steel appliances, when I overheard a conversation that stopped me cold. "Your sister seems sweet," one of Denise's colleagues was saying. "Very down to earth." Denise laughed, the kind of laugh that sounded friendly but carried an edge I'd never heard from her before. "Oh, Opal's always been the simple one. She's perfectly happy working at that little hardware store in our hometown. Some people just aren't built for bigger things, you know?"
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story.
Simple, not built for bigger things. The words hit me like a slap, but it was the tone that really stung. Dismissive, almost pitying. Like I was a family pet they kept around out of obligation. "She never went to college?" another voice asked. "No, she decided to work instead when our dad left." Which was probably for the best, honestly. Opal's more of a hands-on person. Book learning was never really her thing. I set down my wine glass and walked quietly toward the living room, my cheeks burning with humiliation. Denise was rewriting history, making my sacrifice sound like a personal limitation. Making it seem like I'd chosen my life because I wasn't capable of anything better, not because I'd given up my dreams to support hers. The worst part was hearing her friends murmur their sympathetic agreement. Poor Opal, who was too simple for college. Poor Opal, who was satisfied with her small life because she didn't know any better. I spent the rest of the party feeling like an exhibit in a museum of mediocrity, surrounded by people who saw me as Denise's charity case sister. When I congratulated her on the house, she gave me a hug that felt performative. "Thanks for coming, Opal. I know it's a long drive for you." As if the distance was the biggest sacrifice I'd ever made for her. The drive home was the longest 3 hours of my life. I kept replaying Denise's words, trying to convince myself I'd misunderstood or taken them out of context. But the truth was unavoidable. My little sister was embarrassed by me. The person whose college tuition I'd helped pay, whose car I'd helped buy, whose various crises I'd helped solve for 20 years, saw me as an embarrassment to be explained away to her successful friends. That night, I called Mama and told her about the party, carefully editing out the conversation I'd overheard. But Mama wasn't fooled. "Denise is getting a big head," she said with a sigh. "Success changes people sometimes. Don't let it hurt your feelings, baby. You know who you are." But that was the problem. I was starting to realize I didn't know who I was at all. I had spent so many years being whatever my family needed me to be that I'd lost track of what I actually wanted for myself. The second crack appeared 6 months later when Jerome got married. He'd met a lawyer named Patricia, and their wedding was going to be a lavish affair in Atlanta. Jerome called me 2 months before the wedding with a request that made my stomach drop. "Opal, I need a favor," he said, using the tone that always preceded a significant ask. "Patricia's family is paying for most of the wedding, but we're short on some of the vendor payments. I was wondering if you could help us out with about $8,000. Just temporarily, until we get all the wedding gifts and can sort out our finances." $8,000. It was nearly everything I had left after helping Marcus with his failed business. But this was Jerome's wedding, a once-in-a-lifetime event. I emptied my checking account and took out a personal loan for the rest. The wedding was beautiful. Jerome and Patricia looked radiant, and the reception was held at a country club that probably cost more than I made in 6 months. I sat at a table with family friends from our hometown, wearing a dress I'd bought on clearance, and feeling increasingly out of place among the well-dressed guests. During the reception, I approached Jerome to congratulate him and mention the loan repayment, not to pressure him, but to establish a time frame so I could plan my own budget accordingly. "Jerome, congratulations again," I said, hugging my little brother. "When you get a chance, maybe we can talk about the timeline for the loan repayment? I took out a personal loan to help you guys, so I need to figure out my monthly payments." Jerome's expression shifted from joy to irritation in seconds. "Opal, seriously? At my wedding? Can't we talk about money stuff later? This is supposed to be the happiest day of my life. And you're bringing up debt?" His new wife Patricia appeared at his side, her smile sharp and protective. "Is everything okay?" she asked, though her tone suggested she already knew I was the problem. "My sister is worried about money," Jerome said, as if I were being unreasonable for wanting to know when I'd be repaid the $8,000 that had drained my savings. Patricia's smile became even more pointed. "Oh, Jerome told me you were always the responsible one with finances. That's so sweet that you could help out with the wedding. I'm sure Jerome will take care of you when things settle down." The dismissive way she said, "take care of you," made it clear that she saw me as a charity case, someone who needed to be managed rather than respected, as an equal family member who'd made a significant financial sacrifice. I walked away from that conversation feeling smaller than ever. The brother I'd helped raise, whose college expenses I'd contributed to, whose various scrapes I'd helped him out of over the years, was treating me like an annoying creditor at his own wedding. Jerome never brought up the loan repayment. When I called him 3 months later, he acted like I was being petty for even mentioning it. "Things are tight right now with setting up our new household," he said. "Patricia has student loans, and we're trying to buy a house. I thought you'd understand that family helps family without keeping score." Family helps family without keeping score. The irony was breathtaking. I'd been helping family without keeping score for 25 years, but the moment I needed consideration for my own financial situation, I was accused of being mercenary. That's when I started keeping score. Not obsessively, but I began writing down every loan, every favor, every sacrifice, every time I'd put my family's needs ahead of my own. The list was longer than I'd expected, and more depressing than I'd imagined. The third crack came during Candace's divorce proceedings the following year. She'd married right out of college, and the marriage had lasted exactly 3 years before her husband decided he'd rather be with his secretary than with my sister. Candace was devastated, and she needed both emotional and financial support while she figured out her next steps. I drove to her apartment every weekend for 2 months, helping her pack, clean, and organize her life post-divorce. I loaned her money for attorney fees, first month's rent on a new place, and basic living expenses while she looked for a new job. I listened to hours of crying phone calls and provided the kind of emotional support that close family members give each other during life's worst moments. When Candace finally got back on her feet and started dating again, she threw a new beginnings party to celebrate her independence. She invited everyone in the family except me. I found out about the party through a photo Denise posted on social media. There was Candace, laughing and surrounded by our siblings, toasting her fresh start with people who looked happy and relaxed. The caption read, "Celebrating Candace's new chapter with the people who matter most. The people who matter most." I stared at that photo for 20 minutes, looking for some explanation that would make this make sense. Had I done something wrong? Had there been a miscommunication? Was this some kind of oversight? I called Candace to ask about it, trying to keep my voice casual and non-accusatory. "Hey, I saw Denise's post about your party. It looked like fun." "Oh, that," Candace said, her voice suddenly tight. "It was just a small thing. Very last minute. I didn't want to bother you since you live so far away." Live so far away. I lived the same distance I'd always lived. The same distance I'd driven every weekend for 2 months to help her through her divorce. The same distance hadn't been a problem when she needed me, but it was suddenly an insurmountable obstacle when it came to celebrating with me. "I would have made the drive," I said quietly. "I've been worried about you. I wanted to see how you were doing." "I'm doing great," Candace said, her tone brightening in a way that felt forced. Really great. Things are looking up. The conversation felt stilted and awkward, nothing like the intimate talks we'd had during her crisis. It was as if helping her through the worst time of her life had made me invisible to her, once she no longer needed my help. I hung up feeling like I'd been used and discarded. Candace had needed my money, my time, my emotional support, and my weekend labor during her divorce. But when it came time to celebrate her recovery, when it came time to share joy instead of burden, I wasn't worth including. That night, I sat in my small apartment and really looked at my life for the first time in years. I was 41 years old, single, living paycheck to paycheck despite working full-time for 25 years, because most of my income had gone to family emergencies and family needs. I had no savings, no retirement fund, no prospects for advancement, and apparently no real place in the family I'd spent my adult life supporting. I was the family's emergency contact, but not their celebration guest. I was their financial backup plan, but not their first choice for good news. I was useful when they were in trouble, but invisible when they were happy. The fourth crack came during Christmas dinner at Mama's house that year. It was our traditional gathering, with everyone bringing side dishes while Mama cooked the turkey. I'd driven down with a trunk full of gifts I'd saved for months to buy, plus ingredients for my famous sweet potato casserole that everyone always requested. The conversation around the dinner table was lively and warm, full of updates about everyone's careers, relationships, and plans for the new year. Marcus had started a new business venture. Denise had been promoted to senior partner at her real estate firm. Jerome and Patricia were house hunting. Candace had started dating someone new. Tommy had gotten promoted at his marketing job. When it was my turn to share updates, the enthusiasm around the table noticeably dimmed. I mentioned that I was thinking about taking some business classes at the community college, maybe working toward a degree eventually. That's nice, Marcus said, but his attention was already shifting back to his phone. Good for you. It's never too late to improve yourself, Denise added in a tone that managed to be both encouraging and condescending at the same time. The conversation quickly moved on to Jerome's house hunting adventures, and I realized that my dreams and goals weren't interesting enough to sustain anyone's attention for more than 30 seconds. When they talked about their lives, everyone leaned in and asked questions and offered advice. When I talked about mine, they politely waited for me to finish so they could move on to something more engaging. After dinner, while I was washing dishes in Mama's kitchen, I overheard a conversation between Marcus and Tommy in the living room. Do you think Opal's okay? Tommy asked. She seemed a little quiet today. You know how Opal is, Marcus replied. She gets moody sometimes, probably because she doesn't have much going on in her life. Work, home, repeat. It would make anyone depressed. Moody. Depressed because I didn't have much going on in my life. Not depressed because I'd spent 25 years watching everyone else build their dreams, while I put mine on hold to support theirs. Not hurt because my family treated me like a useful appliance, rather than a person with feelings and aspirations. Just moody because my life was boring. I finished the dishes in silence, said my goodbyes, and drove home in a fog of realization. My family didn't see me as an equal. They saw me as a resource to be managed, a problem solver to be called when needed, a safety net that would always be there but didn't require much maintenance or consideration. I was the family's insurance policy, valuable when needed, but otherwise forgotten and taken for granted. The breaking point came 3 months later when Mama had her stroke. I was at work, helping a customer choose paint colors for their living room, when my phone rang with a call from Riverside Medical Center. Mama had collapsed at the grocery store and been rushed to the hospital. She was in critical condition. I dropped everything and drove straight to the hospital, arriving to find Mama unconscious and hooked up to machines. The doctors explained that she'd had a major stroke, that the next 48 hours would be critical, that her recovery was uncertain at best. I called all my siblings to let them know what had happened. Every single one of them expressed shock and concern and promised to come as soon as possible. Marcus said he'd drive down that evening. Denise said she'd be there the next morning. Jerome said he'd take time off work and drive up from Atlanta. Candace promised to catch the first flight she could get. Tommy swore he'd leave work immediately and be there by dinner time. I spent that first night alone in the ICU waiting room, catching catnaps in uncomfortable chairs, in checking with nurses every hour for updates on Mama's condition. I called my siblings periodically to keep them informed, and each time they assured me they were making arrangements to come. The next morning, Marcus called to say his business obligations were more complicated than he'd thought, but he'd definitely be there by the weekend. Denise texted that she had to show houses to a major client, but would drive down as soon as she could reschedule. Jerome said Patricia was sick and he couldn't leave her alone, but he'd try to make it later in the week. Candace's flight had been canceled due to weather, and she was having trouble finding another one. Tommy had a crucial presentation at work that he couldn't miss, but he'd definitely be there soon. Soon. Later. As soon as possible. Definitely by the weekend. Every excuse was reasonable taken individually, but together they painted a clear picture. None of them were prioritizing Mama's medical emergency the way I was. I spent 6 days at that hospital, sleeping in chairs, eating vending machine food, managing conversations with doctors and nurses, making medical decisions when Mama couldn't, and providing the constant presence that she needed during her recovery. 6 days of waiting for my siblings to show up and help share the burden. Marcus finally arrived on day 7, staying for exactly 2 hours, before declaring that Mama looked much better and he was sure she'd be fine. Denise came for an afternoon visit, took some photos of herself with Mama for social media to show what a caring daughter she was, and left before evening visiting hours ended. Jerome sent flowers and called twice. Candace sent a care package and promised to visit once Mama was transferred to a regular room. Tommy sent a card. When Mama was finally stable enough to be moved out of ICU, I was the one who researched rehabilitation facilities, coordinated with insurance companies, and made arrangements for her ongoing care. I was the one who cleaned out her house and organized her finances, and figured out how to manage her recovery. My siblings expressed gratitude for everything I was handling. "Thank God for Opal," became their standard refrain. What would we do without her? They said it like it was a compliment, but it felt more like a life sentence. I took family medical leave from work to care for Mama during her rehabilitation. For 6 weeks, I lived in her house, drove her to therapy appointments, managed her medications, helped her with basic daily tasks, and provided the round-the-clock care she needed. My siblings called regularly to check in, but calling was the extent of their involvement. When Mama was finally strong enough to live independently again, my siblings organized a family dinner to celebrate her recovery. They toasted her strength and resilience, and they toasted my dedication and sacrifice. Marcus raised his glass and said, "To Opal, who's always been the heart of this family. The heart of the family." I smiled and accepted their gratitude, but inside I was beginning to understand that being the heart of this family meant being the part that did all the work, while everyone else benefited from the circulation. That night, as I prepared to return to my own life after 6 weeks of putting everything on hold for Mama's care, I made a decision. I was going to start living for myself. I was going to set boundaries. I was going to build the life I wanted instead of constantly maintaining everyone else's lives. I had no idea that my newfound resolve was about to be tested in ways I never could have imagined, and that I was about to discover just how little my family valued me when I stopped being useful to them. The transformation started small. So small that at first even I didn't notice it happening. 3 weeks after returning to my apartment above Henderson's Hardware, I received a call from Tommy. His voice carried that familiar edge of barely controlled panic that usually preceded a request for money. "Opal, I'm in a bit of a jam," he began, and I could practically hear him pacing on the other end of the line. "My landlord is threatening eviction if I don't catch up on rent. I'm behind 3 months, and I need about $4,000 to get current. I know it's a lot, but you know I'm good for it." In the past, I would have immediately started calculating how I could come up with $4,000. I would have checked my savings, considered taking out another personal loan, maybe even asked Mr. Henderson for an advance on my salary. I would have felt that familiar surge of anxiety mixed with determination, the feeling that solving Tommy's problem was somehow my responsibility. Instead, I found myself saying something that surprised us both. "I'm sorry, Tommy, but I can't help you with that." The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. "What do you mean you can't help?" he finally asked, his voice shifting from pleading to confused to something approaching indignation. It's just a loan. You've helped me before. I've helped you before, and I've helped Marcus before, and Jerome, and Candace, and Denise, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. I've been helping all of you for 25 years, and I need to start focusing on my own financial security. Your own financial security? Tommy repeated the words like they were in a foreign language. Opal, I'm about to be homeless. This is an emergency. Your rent being 3 months behind isn't an emergency, Tommy. It's a pattern. And it's a pattern I can't keep enabling. I heard him take a sharp breath. Enabling. Opal, what's gotten into you? This isn't like you. He was right. It wasn't like me. The old me would have already been planning how to get him the money. The old me would have prioritized his housing crisis over my own financial stability without question. But sitting in my small apartment, looking at my own stack of bills and my nearly empty savings account, I realized that the old me had been making terrible decisions for decades. Maybe it should be like me, I said quietly. Maybe I should have been taking better care of myself all along. Tommy's tone shifted again, this time to something that sounded like wounded betrayal. I can't believe you're going to let me lose my apartment over money. After everything we've been through as a family. Everything we've been through as a family. The phrase hit me like a slap, but not in the way Tommy intended. Everything we'd been through as a family had consisted of me solving problems while everyone else created them. Everything we'd been through had been me sacrificing while they benefited. You're not going to lose your apartment because of me, Tommy. You're going to lose it because you haven't paid rent in 3 months. Those are very different things. After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen for an hour, waiting for the guilt to overwhelm me. Waiting for the familiar anxiety that came with letting family down. Waiting for the urge to call him back and figure out how to get him the money after all. But the guilt didn't come. Instead, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Relief. Relief that someone else's crisis wasn't automatically my emergency. Relief that I didn't have to figure out how to solve a problem I hadn't created. Relief that I could prioritize my own needs without feeling selfish. That relief was short-lived. Within 24 hours, I received calls from Marcus, Denise, and Candace, all expressing concern about my unusual behavior and my uncharacteristic selfishness toward Tommy. Apparently, my refusal to bail him out had sparked a family conference call, where my mental state and recent attitude changes had become the primary topic of discussion. Opal, I'm worried about you, Denise said when she called, her voice dripping with the kind of fake concern that people use when they're really annoyed but trying to sound caring. Tommy said you were really harsh with him about the rent situation. That's not like you at all. I wasn't harsh, I replied, already feeling defensive. I just told him I couldn't loan him money anymore. But why? You've always been so generous with family. Has something happened? Are you having financial problems? The question was so absurd I almost laughed. Was I having financial problems? I'd been having financial problems for 25 years because I kept giving my money away to family members who treated my bank account like their personal emergency fund. But apparently, that had never occurred to Denise as a problem before. I'm trying to build some savings, I said simply. I'm trying to plan for my own future, instead of constantly managing everyone else's crises. Your own future? Denise's tone had shifted from fake concern to genuine confusion. Opal, you're 42 years old. What kind of future planning could you possibly need to do at this point? The casual cruelty of that statement took my breath away. What kind of future planning could I possibly need to do? As if I were already past the point where my life mattered, where my dreams counted, where my financial security was worth considering. As if being 42 meant I should just accept whatever leftovers remained, after everyone else had taken what they needed. The same kind of future planning everyone else does, I said, my voice tight with controlled anger. Retirement planning, emergency funds, maybe even some money for things I want instead of things other people need. Things you want? Denise actually laughed. Like what? Opal, you're perfectly content with your little life. You always have been. You're not the type to want expensive things or big changes. There it was again. The narrative that I was simple, content with less, naturally suited for a smaller life. The story they'd all agreed on to justify taking everything I had to offer while giving nothing meaningful in return. Maybe I haven't had the chance to want things because I've been too busy paying for everyone else's wants, I said, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. That's really unfair, Denise shot back. We're family. Family helps each other. I can't believe you're suddenly keeping score after all these years. Keeping score, the same phrase Jerome had used when I'd asked about loan repayment. As if wanting basic consideration and reciprocity in relationships was somehow petty and mercenary. As if expecting fairness was a character flaw. I'm not keeping score, I said. I'm just finally looking at the scoreboard. The conversation ended badly, with Denise accusing me of becoming bitter and me accusing her of taking me for granted. But for the first time in my adult life, I didn't immediately call back to apologize and smooth things over. I didn't try to fix the relationship by backing down from my position. I just sat with the discomfort of family disapproval and discovered that I could survive it. The next test came 2 weeks later, when Candace called with exciting news. She'd gotten engaged to her new boyfriend, and they were planning a destination wedding in Costa Rica. The wedding was going to be small, just immediate family, but it was going to be expensive. Flights, hotels, resort fees, wedding attire suitable for a tropical climate. I know it's a lot to ask, Candace said, her voice bubbling with excitement, but I was hoping you could help me with some of the costs. Not the whole thing, obviously, but maybe flights and hotel for the family members who can't afford it on their own? I want everyone to be there, and I know some people are struggling financially. Some people were struggling financially. She meant me. She meant that I was the one who couldn't afford a $1,000 plane ticket and a week at a Costa Rican resort. But she was framing it as me helping others who were struggling, not admitting that I was the one who needed help. Candace, I can't afford to pay for my own trip, let alone anyone else's, I said honestly. A Costa Rica wedding is going to cost more than I make in 2 months. But I really want you there, she said, and I could hear the pout in her voice. You're my sister. It won't be the same without you. Then maybe you should have planned a wedding that your family could actually afford to attend, I said, the words coming out harsher than I'd intended. The silence that followed was deafening. Wow, Candace said finally. I didn't realize you'd become so bitter. I'm trying to include you in my special day, and you're being completely negative about it. I'm not being negative. I'm being realistic. You're asking me to spend money I don't have on a vacation. I can't afford to attend a wedding you planned, without considering whether your family could actually participate. I thought you'd want to be there for me, she said, her voice now carrying a wounded tone that I recognized as emotional manipulation. I thought family was important to you. Family was important to me. That was exactly the problem. Family had been so important to me that I'd sacrificed everything else for it, and now I was being told I wasn't family-oriented enough because I couldn't afford to go into debt for someone else's party. Family is important to me, I said quietly, but apparently I'm not important enough to you to plan a wedding that includes me. Candace hung up on me. Within hours, I received a group text from Marcus informing me that the family had decided to pool money to help cover my Costa Rica expenses, so I wouldn't have an excuse to miss Candace's wedding. The text was framed as generosity, but the underlying message was clear. My financial limitations were an embarrassment to be solved, not a reality to be respected. I responded to the group text with a simple message. Thank you for the offer, but I won't be attending the wedding. Have a wonderful time. The response was immediate and brutal. Individual calls and texts from every sibling, all expressing shock, disappointment, and anger at my decision. How could I miss Candace's wedding? How could I be so selfish? How could I let pride get in the way of family? Pride. They thought this was about pride. They thought I was too proud to accept their charity, too stubborn to let them pay my way. They couldn't conceive that this was about self-respect, about refusing to be treated like a charity case, about declining to participate in a system that consistently positioned me as the recipient of their benevolence, rather than an equal family member whose needs mattered. Marcus left a voicemail that was particularly cutting. Opal, I don't know what's happened to you lately, but you're acting like a spoiled child. Candace is trying to include you in her wedding. We're all trying to help you afford it. And you're throwing a tantrum because what? Because we didn't consult you about the location? Grow up. This isn't about you. This isn't about you. That phrase echoed in my head for days. He was right in a way. It wasn't about me. It had never been about me. Every family decision, every financial choice, every plan had been made without considering my input, my limitations, or my needs. I'd spent 42 years accommodating everyone else's choices and then being expected to be grateful when they threw me scraps to help me participate in the lives they'd built without me. The Costa Rica wedding happened without me. I saw the photos on social media. My siblings laughing on the beach, toasting the happy couple, enjoying a vacation they could afford because they hadn't spent decades depleting their savings to solve other people's problems. They looked relaxed, happy, unburdened by financial stress or family obligations. Not one of them called to tell me how the wedding went. Not one of them sent photos or shared stories or made any effort to help me feel included in the celebration I'd missed. They'd written me off as easily as they'd written off my concerns about the cost. That's when I realized something that changed everything. They didn't actually want me there. They wanted the appearance of inclusion, the ability to say they tried to include me, the moral high ground that came with offering to pay my way. But when I refused to play along, when I declined to be their grateful charity case, they were perfectly happy to celebrate without me. I started paying closer attention to family communications after that, looking for patterns I'd been too close to see before. What I discovered was even more devastating than I'd expected. The family group text thread, which I'd assumed included everyone, turned out to be missing me most of the time. I only received messages when my presence was needed for something: organizing care for mama, contributing money to group gifts, providing labor for moves or home repairs. The casual conversations, the daily check-ins, the shared jokes and photos, those happened in a separate thread that didn't include me. I figured this out by accident when Denise mentioned a funny story about Tommy's new haircut, referring to photos she'd sent to the group. I hadn't received any photos, and when I checked the thread, there was no mention of Tommy's haircut. When I asked about it, Denise claimed she'd forgotten to add me to that particular message, but the explanation felt thin. I started testing this theory, paying attention to references to conversations I hadn't been part of, jokes I didn't understand, plans that seemed to have been made without my knowledge. The evidence was overwhelming. There was a family, and then there was me. I was kept informed on a need-to-know basis, included when my participation was required, excluded from the daily intimacy of their relationships with each other. The most painful discovery came during a phone call with Mama about 3 months after the Costa Rica wedding. She mentioned that she'd had dinner with Marcus and Denise the week before, and they'd brought Tommy along because he was going through a rough patch with his job. Marcus brought Tommy? I asked, confused. How is Tommy doing? He hasn't called me in weeks. Oh, you know Tommy, Mama said with a dismissive wave I could hear in her voice. He's always dramatic about work stuff. Marcus and Denise were helping him figure out his next move. The same Marcus and Denise who'd criticized me for not giving Tommy money for rent were now providing emotional support and career guidance. The same family members who'd made me feel selfish for setting financial boundaries were rallying around Tommy in his time of need. What kind of help are they giving him? I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. Oh, advice about job searching, networking contacts, that sort of thing. Denise thinks she might be able to get him an interview with someone in her real estate network. Real help, meaningful support that would actually improve Tommy's situation long term, rather than just throwing money at his immediate crisis. The kind of help I'd never been offered, despite struggling financially for decades because of my family obligations. That's really nice of them, I said, and I meant it. I was genuinely glad that Tommy was getting useful support. But I was also devastated by the realization that my family was capable of providing substantive help to each other. They just chose not to extend that kind of thoughtful assistance to me. After that phone call, I started cataloging all the ways my siblings supported each other while treating me like an ATM. Marcus had helped Jerome get started in his first business venture after college, providing contacts and advice that had launched Jerome's successful career. Denise had helped Candace through her divorce not just emotionally, but by connecting her with her own attorney and helping her find a job in a related field. Tommy had lived with Jerome and Patricia for 6 months while he got back on his feet after a breakup, paying minimal rent and having his meals provided. They mentored each other, housed each other, opened doors for each other, invested in each other's futures. When they needed money, they asked me. When they needed actual support, they turned to each other. I was the family bank, not the family member. The breaking point in this new phase of family dysfunction came during Thanksgiving that year. The dinner was being held at Denise's house, and I'd volunteered to bring my famous sweet potato casserole and green bean almondine, both dishes that required expensive ingredients I'd had to budget for carefully. I arrived at Denise's house to find a celebration already in progress. Jerome had gotten a promotion at work, and everyone was toasting his success with champagne that cost more than I spent on groceries in a week. The conversation was animated and joyful, full of talk about Jerome's new salary, his expanding responsibilities, his bright future. "We're so proud of you," Marcus said, raising his glass. "You've really made something of yourself." "Here's to success," Denise added, "and to family who believe in each other." Family who believe in each other. I took a sip of champagne and tried to remember the last time anyone had toasted my achievements, my potential, my future. I tried to remember the last time anyone had expressed pride in my accomplishments or belief in my capabilities. During dinner, the conversation continued to revolve around everyone's career successes and life updates. Marcus's new business was thriving. Denise had been featured in a local business magazine. Candace's marriage was going well, and she and her husband were thinking about buying a bigger house. Tommy had gotten the job interview through Denise's connection and was optimistic about his prospects. When the conversation finally turned to me, the tone shifted noticeably. "How are things at the hardware store, Opal?" Candace asked, with the kind of polite interest people show when they're fulfilling a social obligation. "Actually, things are going really well," I said, feeling a spark of genuine excitement for the first time all evening. "Mr. Henderson is talking about promoting me to assistant manager, and I've been taking some business courses online. I'm thinking about maybe opening my own store someday." The silence that followed my announcement was deafening. No one raised their glass. No one offered congratulations. No one asked follow-up questions about my plans or expressed enthusiasm about my goals. Finally, Marcus cleared his throat. "That's ambitious," he said in a tone that made the word sound like an insult. "Do you think there's really a market for another hardware store?" Denise asked. Her question phrased as concern but clearly meant as discouragement. "I mean, with all the big box stores these days." "And the startup costs," Jerome added. "Small businesses are really risky, especially in retail." One by one, my siblings found polite ways to express doubt about my dreams. They questioned my business sense, my financial capabilities, my understanding of the market. They presented their skepticism as loving concern, as practical advice, as realistic perspective. But when Jerome had announced his promotion, no one had questioned whether he was capable of handling the responsibilities. When Denise had started her real estate career, no one had warned her about market competition. When Marcus had launched his business ventures, even the one that failed, everyone had been supportive and encouraging. Their doubt wasn't about business realities. It was about me. They genuinely didn't believe I was capable of success, didn't think I had the intelligence or skills or vision to build something meaningful. They saw me as someone who was suited for small, safe supporting roles, not as someone who could be a leader or entrepreneur or innovator. "I think it's wonderful that you're taking classes," Mama said finally, clearly trying to smooth over the awkward tension. "Learning new things is always good." Learning new things is always good. The kind of vague, patronizing encouragement you give to a child who's trying to finger paint, not to an adult who's working toward genuine professional goals. I excused myself to use the bathroom and stood in front of Denise's mirror, looking at a woman I barely recognized. When had I become someone whose dreams were met with polite skepticism instead of enthusiastic support? When had I become the family member whose potential was doubted instead of celebrated? The answer was obvious. I'd always been that person. I'd just been too busy taking care of everyone else to notice how little they believed in me. When I returned to the dining room, the conversation had moved on to holiday plans and vacation ideas. No one mentioned my business courses again. No one asked about my timeline for opening a store. No one offered advice, contacts, or encouragement. My announcement had been absorbed and dismissed like a minor interruption in the flow of more important discussions. That night, I drove home in a fog of realization that was both devastating and liberating. My family didn't just take me for granted financially. They took me for granted as a person. They didn't see me as someone with legitimate ambitions, valid dreams, or unrealized potential. They saw me as someone who was already exactly where she belonged. Someone who should be satisfied with her small role in their larger lives. The next morning, I did something I'd never done before. I called in sick to work when I wasn't actually sick. I spent the day in my apartment, thinking about everything that had happened over the past year, everything I'd learned about my place in my family, everything I'd discovered about the way they really saw me. By evening, I'd made a decision that would change everything. I was going to stop trying to earn their respect and appreciation. I was going to stop hoping they'd eventually recognize my worth and contributions. I was going to stop waiting for them to include me as an equal in the family I'd spent my life supporting. I was going to start treating them exactly the way they'd been treating me all along, as people who were useful when I needed something, but who didn't deserve my time, energy, or resources otherwise. It was time to give my family a taste of their own medicine, and I was finally ready to be the doctor. The transformation didn't happen overnight. It began with small acts of rebellion that felt revolutionary to someone who'd spent 4 decades saying yes to everything. When Marcus called 2 weeks after Thanksgiving asking if I could co-sign a loan for his latest business venture, I said no without explanation or apology. When Denise texted asking if I could babysit her friend's children for the weekend because she'd double-booked herself, I replied with a simple, "Sorry, not available." When Candace called crying about wedding planning stress and expecting me to spend 3 hours listening to her vent about flower arrangements and catering drama, I told her I had to go after 15 minutes. Each refusal felt like stepping off a cliff, but instead of falling, I discovered I could fly. The responses were predictable. Marcus accused me of being spiteful and unhelpful. Denise suggested I was going through some kind of midlife crisis. Candace wondered aloud if I was jealous of her happiness. They'd found explanations for my behavior that didn't require them to examine their own treatment of me, comfortable narratives that positioned me as the problem, rather than acknowledging that I was simply refusing to be their solution anymore. But the real test came in February when Mama called with news that would have sent the old me into a spiral of anxiety and obligation. "Opal Jean, I need to talk to you about something important," Mama said, her voice carrying the weight of serious conversation. "I've been thinking about selling the house and moving into one of those senior living communities. The maintenance is getting to be too much for me, and I want to be around people my own age. The family home, the place where we'd grown up, where Mama had raised 6 children as a single mother, where every holiday and celebration had taken place for 40 years. The thought of losing it felt like losing a piece of our history." "That's a big decision, Mama," I said carefully. "Have you talked to the others about it?" "Well, that's the thing," Mama said, and I could hear hesitation in her voice. "I mentioned it to Marcus when he called last week, and he got very upset. He says I can't sell the house because it's where his children spent their holidays, and it wouldn't be fair to take that away from them." Denise agrees with him. She says the house is part of our family legacy. Family legacy. Marcus's children, who visited maybe twice a year. Denise's attachment to a house she rarely visited anymore. I felt a familiar anger rising in my chest, but this time it was accompanied by something new. Clarity. "What do you want to do, Mama?" I asked. Not what Marcus wants, not what Denise thinks is fair, but what would make you happy and comfortable. Mama was quiet for a long moment. "I want to sell it," she said finally. "I want to move somewhere. I don't have to worry about gutters and furnace repairs and yard work. I want to be around people and activities. I don't want to spend my golden years maintaining a house that's too big for me just so other people can feel good about preserving their childhood memories." "Then you should sell it," I said without hesitation. "It's your house, your decision, your life. If Marcus and Denise want to preserve childhood memories, they can buy photo albums." "But they're so upset about it," Mama said. "Marcus said I was being selfish, that I wasn't thinking about the grandchildren. Denise offered to hire a cleaning service and a lawn care company so I wouldn't have to worry about maintenance, but she wants me to keep the house." "With whose money?" I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. "Well, she thought maybe we could all chip in." Of course. Denise's solution to Mama's problem was for everyone else to pay for the upkeep of a house Mama no longer wanted, just so Denise could feel good about preserving it. And by everyone, I knew she meant me. Marcus would find excuses about his business expenses. Jerome would claim his mortgage was stretching him thin. Candace would mention her honeymoon debt. Tommy would laugh about being broke as always. I would be expected to carry the financial burden of maintaining their nostalgic fantasy. Mama, do you remember when I wanted to go to college and I gave up that dream to help support the family? Of course I remember, Mama said quietly. I've always felt terrible about that. Do you remember anyone else in the family offering to sacrifice their dreams so I could pursue mine? The silence stretched long enough for me to know she understood where I was going with this. No, she said finally. They didn't. So when Marcus talks about fairness and family legacy, remember that he's talking about principles he's never applied to himself. When Denise talks about what's best for everyone, remember that she's never put anyone's needs ahead of her own convenience. When they ask you to sacrifice what you want for their comfort, remember that they've never done the same for you or for me. Another long pause. Then Mama said something that surprised me. You know what, Opal Jean? You're absolutely right. I raised them better than this. But apparently I failed to teach them that love isn't supposed to be one-sided. Within a week, Mama had contacted a realtor and put the house on the market. The family response was swift and brutal. I received angry calls from Marcus and Denise, both demanding to know what I'd said to manipulate Mama into such a drastic decision. Jerome sent a long email about family responsibilities and respecting our elders' wishes, apparently not seeing the irony in lecturing me about respecting Mama's wishes, while simultaneously opposing her decision to sell her own house. Candace left a voicemail that was particularly revealing. Opal, I don't know what kind of revenge fantasy you're living out, but convincing Mama to sell our childhood home just to spite us is really cruel. We all know you're angry about something, but this affects all of us, not just you. Revenge fantasy. The idea that supporting Mama's right to make decisions about her own life was somehow an act of vengeance against my siblings. The assumption that I couldn't possibly have Mama's best interests at heart, that everything I did had to be motivated by spite or manipulation. But the most telling response came from a source I hadn't expected. Jerome's wife, Patricia. She called me on a Thursday evening, her voice sickeningly sweet in the way that meant she was about to say something terrible while pretending to be helpful. Opal, I hope you don't mind me calling, she began. Jerome and I have been talking, and we're really concerned about the influence you seem to be having on your mother lately. Influence? As if Mama were a child who couldn't think for herself. As if supporting her autonomy was somehow manipulative. I'm not sure what you mean, I said, though I knew exactly what she meant. Well, this whole house selling thing, for one, Patricia continued. And Jerome mentioned that you've been discouraging family gatherings and refusing to help with family obligations. It seems like you're trying to isolate your mother from the rest of the family. The accusation was so absurd and so psychologically twisted that I almost laughed. I was being accused of isolating Mama from the family that had been ignoring her needs and preferences in favor of their own sentimental attachments. I was being painted as the manipulative one for supporting her right to live her life on her own terms. Patricia, I said, my voice deadly calm, let me ask you something. When was the last time Jerome visited Mama without being asked? When was the last time any of you called her just to chat, not because you needed something or wanted to share news? When was the last time anyone in this family prioritized her comfort and happiness over their own convenience? That's really unfair, Patricia sputtered. We all love your mother very much. Loving someone and acting lovingly toward them are two different things, I replied. Mama wants to sell her house and move to a place where she'll be happier and more comfortable. The fact that you're all more concerned with your own feelings about that decision than with her well-being tells me everything I need to know about your priorities. I think you're being deliberately difficult, Patricia said, her sweet tone finally cracking to reveal the irritation underneath. Family is supposed to work together to solve problems, not create division. You're right, I said. Family is supposed to work together. The problem is that for the past 25 years, working together has meant me working and everyone else benefiting. I'm done with that arrangement. I hung up on her and immediately called Mama to give her a heads up about the family pressure campaign that was undoubtedly coming her way. Sure enough, she'd already received calls from Marcus and Denise, both trying to convince her that selling the house was a mistake she'd regret later. They made it sound like I was having some kind of breakdown, Mama told me, frustration clear in her voice. Marcus actually suggested I should see a doctor about my decision-making abilities. As if wanting to downsize at 73 is a sign of dementia. Are you having second thoughts? I asked. About selling the house? Absolutely not. About the family I raised? Maybe a little. The house sold within 3 weeks to a young couple with twin toddlers who fell in love with the big backyard and the neighborhood elementary school. Mama was thrilled with the sale price and excited about moving to Sunset Gardens, a senior community with a pool, a library, organized activities, and a dining room where she wouldn't have to cook for herself every night. The rest of the family treated the sale like a death in the family. They organized a goodbye gathering at the house before the closing, ostensibly to help Mama pack, but really to stage an elaborate guilt trip designed to make her change her mind at the last minute. I arrived at the house to find my siblings moving through the rooms like mourners at a funeral, taking pictures of empty spaces and commenting dramatically about all the memories being lost forever. Marcus stood in the kitchen talking about learning to ride a bike in the driveway. Denise sat on the stairs reminiscing about Christmas mornings. Jerome took selfies in what used to be his bedroom, captioning them with things like, "Last time in this sacred space." The performance was Oscar-worthy in its emotional manipulation. "I can't believe this is really happening," Candace said, wiping away tears that may or may not have been genuine. "It feels like we're losing our foundation." "The foundation isn't a building," I said quietly. "The foundation is Mama. And she's moving to a place where she'll be happier and safer." "But all our memories are here," Tommy protested. "Our whole childhood." "Your childhood is over," I replied. "Mama's present is what matters now." The looks they gave me could have melted steel. I was clearly the villain in their narrative, the cold-hearted daughter who cared more about practical concerns than sentimental value. They'd convinced themselves that I was somehow responsible for Mama's decision, that she couldn't possibly have wanted this change without my malicious influence. But Mama handled their emotional manipulation with more grace than I would have managed. "I know you're all upset," she said, addressing the group from her position in the living room, where she was sorting through photo albums. "But I need you to understand something. This house served its purpose. It sheltered us when we needed shelter. It brought us together when we needed to be together, and now it's time for it to shelter another family while I move on to the next chapter of my life." "But Mama," Marcus started, "this is where we became a family." "No, son," Mama interrupted firmly. "We became a family when I chose to love each of you unconditionally and raise you to love each other. That didn't happen because of this house, and it won't disappear because I sell it. If you think our family bond depends on a building, then I failed to teach you what family really means." The room fell silent. For a moment I thought maybe her words had gotten through to them, maybe they'd finally understand that their opposition to her decision was selfish and hurtful. Then Denise spoke up. "Of course we know that, Mama. But some of us appreciate tradition and continuity more than others." Her eyes flicked to me as she said it, making it clear who she thought lacked appreciation for tradition. "And some of us appreciate Mama's autonomy and happiness more than our own nostalgia," I replied evenly. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. My siblings clearly wanted to escalate the conflict, to turn this into a direct confrontation where they could gang up on me and make me the scapegoat for their guilt about not supporting Mama's decision. But Mama shut that down quickly. "That's enough," she said with the same authoritative tone she'd used when we were children fighting over toys. "I don't want to spend my last day in this house listening to my children argue about whether I should be allowed to make my own decisions. If you can't support my choice, at least respect it." The packing continued in uncomfortable silence, with my siblings making passive-aggressive comments about change and loss, while I focused on helping Mama sort through decades of accumulated belongings. It was during this process that I made a discovery that changed everything I thought I knew about my family's finances. I was helping Mama clean out the desk in her bedroom when I found a folder labeled Family Loans in her neat handwriting. Inside were detailed records of money she'd lent to my siblings over the years, complete with dates, amounts, and repayment schedules. The folder was thick, and the amounts were staggering. Marcus owed Mama $12,000 from various loans over the past 5 years. Denise had borrowed $8,000 for her real estate license and startup costs, plus another $6,000 for her house down payment. Jerome owed $15,000 from wedding expenses and his first business venture. Candace had borrowed $9,000 for college loans and divorce attorney fees. Tommy owed $7,000 from various emergencies and rent payments, $57,000. Mama had lent my siblings $57,000 over the years, most of it never repaid, all of it carefully documented but apparently never discussed or enforced. I stared at the folder in shock, doing quick math in my head. $57,000 was more than I made in 2 years at the hardware store. It was enough for a down payment on a house, enough for a college degree, enough for the kind of financial security I'd never had, because I'd been too busy giving my money away to family emergencies. But the real shock came when I found my own section in the folder. It was a single sheet of paper with my name at the top and one entry. Christmas, 1998. Opal borrowed $50 for Christmas gifts. Repaid January 15, 1999. $50. In 25 years of family financial crises, I had borrowed $50 from Mama, and I'd paid it back within a month. Meanwhile, my siblings had treated her like a personal bank, borrowing thousands upon thousands of dollars, and apparently feeling no obligation to repay her. I sat on Mama's bed holding that folder, feeling like I'd been punched in the stomach. All those years I'd been emptying my savings accounts to help my siblings. All those times I'd gone without so they could have what they needed, they'd also been borrowing money from Mama. They'd had 2 sources of family funding while I'd been struggling to cover my own basic expenses. Opal Jean? Mama's voice came from the doorway. What's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost. I held up the folder. Mama, what is this? Her face went pale. Oh, honey, you weren't supposed to find that. Weren't supposed to find it? Mama, they owe you $57,000. Combined. And they've been coming to me for money at the same time they were borrowing from you? Mama sat down on the bed beside me, looking older than her 73 years. They needed help. And I had some savings from your father's life insurance. I thought I was being a good mother. You were being a good mother, but they've been taking advantage of both of us. I flipped through the pages again, seeing loan after loan with no record of repayment. Do they even acknowledge these debts anymore? Not really, Mama admitted quietly. At first, they all promised to pay me back as soon as they could. But as time went on, it became easier to just not mention it. They act like the money was gifts, not loans. Gifts? I felt sick. Mama, this is enough money to secure your retirement. This is enough money to pay for assisted living for years if you ever need it. They've basically stolen your financial security. Don't say that, Mama protested weakly. They're my children. You don't steal from family. Don't you? I asked. What would you call borrowing money with no intention of paying it back? What would you call allowing your mother to deplete her savings while you build your own wealth? I thought about Marcus's successful business, funded partially by money he'd borrowed from Mama and never repaid. Denise's beautiful house, purchased with a down payment loan from Mama that had been quietly forgotten. Jerome's wedding and career launch, subsidized by Mama's savings. Candace's divorce and fresh start, funded by money Mama couldn't afford to lose. Tommy's constant emergencies, always solved with Mama's financial sacrifices. They'd all been living better lives because Mama had been living with less. And I'd been contributing to the problem, giving them my money while being completely unaware that they had another source they were exploiting even more ruthlessly. Does anyone else know about these loans? I asked. Mama shook her head. I never told any of them about the others. I didn't want to create jealousy or competition. But they all knew you were lending money to people. They just assumed they were your only borrower. I suppose so. I stood up, the folder still in my hands, and walked to the window overlooking the backyard where my siblings were loading boxes into their cars. They looked prosperous, successful, unburdened by financial stress. Because they'd transferred that stress to Mama, and by extension to me. "Mama," I said slowly, "what would happen if you asked them to repay these loans? Not all at once, but on a payment schedule." "Oh, I couldn't do that," Mama said immediately. "They'd be upset. They'd think I was being greedy or demanding. They'd think you were expecting them to honor their debts like adults. But what if they can't afford it? What if it causes financial hardship?" I turned to look at her, this woman who'd been so concerned about everyone else's financial hardship that she'd created her own. "Mama, what about your financial hardship? What about the fact that you've given away $57,000 you might need for medical bills or long-term care? What about the fact that you've been so generous that you've compromised your own security?" "I wanted to help them succeed," Mama said sadly. "I wanted to give them the opportunities I never had." "You did help them succeed, but success is supposed to come with responsibility, including the responsibility to pay back money you borrow from your mother." I made a decision in that moment that would have been unthinkable for the old me. I was going to tell my siblings about each other's debts. I was going to expose the full scope of what they'd taken from Mama. And I was going to make it clear that their free ride was over. "Mama," I said carefully, "I think it's time everyone knew the truth about the family finances." Before she could protest, I walked downstairs with the folder in my hands. My siblings were in the living room, sharing final memories and taking group photos in front of the mantel. They looked up as I entered, probably expecting me to make some sentimental comment about the house, or join in their nostalgic reminiscing. Instead, I set the folder down on the coffee table in front of them. "We need to talk," I said. Marcus looked at the folder suspiciously. "What's that?" "It's a record of all the money you've borrowed from Mama over the years. All of you." I opened the folder and spread out the papers so they could see the full scope of the documentation. $57,000, combined. Most of it never repaid. The silence that followed was deafening. I watched as each of my siblings scanned the papers, their expressions shifting from confusion to embarrassment to something that looked like panic as they realized the full extent of what was being revealed. "Where did you get this?" Denise asked, her voice tight. "I found it while helping Mama pack. She's been keeping detailed records of every loan, every promise to repay, every month that's gone by without anyone acknowledging their debts." "This is private information," Marcus said, snatching up the paper with his loan history. "You had no right to go through Mama's personal files. I had every right to know that while you've been coming to me for money, you've also been depleting Mama's savings. I had every right to know that I've been the family ATM while Mama has been the family bank." Jerome was staring at his loan record with something approaching horror. "I didn't realize. I always intended to pay her back." "When?" I asked. "Your oldest loan is from 4 years ago. When exactly were you planning to start making payments?" "This is really inappropriate, Opal," Patricia interjected. "Family finances are private matters." "You're right," I said. "They should be private matters between the borrower and the lender. But apparently my siblings prefer to have multiple lenders who don't know about each other. It's easier to avoid responsibility that way." Candace had gone completely pale. "Mama never asked me to pay her back. She never even mentioned it after the initial loan. Because she's been too polite and too generous to demand that her own children honor their debts," I replied. "She's been sacrificing her financial security rather than making you uncomfortable by asking for what you owe her." "So what?" Tommy said, his voice defensive. "What's your point? That we're all terrible people because we borrowed money from our mother? My point is that you've been taking advantage of Mama's generosity while positioning yourselves as the responsible, successful members of this family. My point is that while you've been criticizing me for setting financial boundaries, you've been exploiting the woman who raised us." "We didn't exploit anyone," Denise snapped. "She offered to help us." Offering to help and being taken advantage of are two different things. Help is supposed to be mutual. Help is supposed to come with gratitude and respect. Help is supposed to be repaid when possible. I looked around at their faces, seeing anger and embarrassment and defensive resentment, but no shame. No genuine recognition of what they'd done to Mama's financial security. No real concern for how their unpaid debts might affect her future. "Here's what's going to happen," I said, my voice steady and calm. "You're each going to set up a payment plan to repay what you owe Mama. Not because I'm making you, but because it's the right thing to do. Because she's 73 years old and deserves to have her money back. Because she's moving to a fixed income and needs every dollar she can get." "You can't make us do anything," Marcus said, standing up as if he were preparing for a physical confrontation. "You're right," I agreed. "I can't make you do anything. But I can make sure Mama knows exactly how much each of you owes her, and I can make sure she understands that asking for repayment isn't greedy or inappropriate. I can help her set up payment schedules and follow up when payments are missed." "This is blackmail?" Denise accused. "No," I said calmly. "Blackmail would be threatening to expose your debts to your friends, your spouses, your employers. This is just transparency. This is just making sure everyone knows the truth about who's been taking and who's been giving in this family." The confrontation that followed was ugly and loud and full of accusations flying in every direction. My siblings accused me of being vindictive, manipulative, and jealous. They claimed I was trying to poison Mama against them, that I was using her move as an excuse to settle old scores, that I was being financially controlling. But through it all, I remained calm. For the first time in my adult life, I had the moral high ground in a family conflict, and I wasn't going to waste it by losing my temper or getting defensive. When the shouting finally died down, I made one final statement that I'd been waiting 42 years to make. "For 25 years, I've been the one who sacrifices so everyone else can succeed. I've been the one who gives up my dreams so you can chase yours. I've been the one who empties my savings account every time someone has a crisis. And all this time, you've been treating me like I'm the one who doesn't contribute to this family, like I'm the one who doesn't matter, like I'm the one whose needs come last." I gestured to the loan documents scattered across the coffee table. "But these papers tell a different story. These papers show that I'm the only one in this family who pays her debts. I'm the only one who's never taken advantage of Mama's generosity. I'm the only one who's given more than I've taken." I looked each of them in the eye before continuing. "So from now on, when you need money, figure it out yourselves. When you need emotional support, call each other. When you need help with your problems, solve them like adults. I'm done being your backup plan, your emergency fund, your unpaid therapist." I picked up my purse and headed for the door. "And if any of you ever accuse me of not caring about family again, remember this conversation. Remember who's been protecting Mama's interests while you've been protecting your own." I left them sitting in that living room surrounded by the evidence of their selfishness, and for the first time in decades, I felt completely free. The silence that followed my departure from the family home lasted exactly 3 days. On the 4th day, my phone started ringing with a vengeance. Marcus called first, his voice tight with barely controlled rage, demanding to know who I thought I was to interfere in family business. Denise followed with a text message calling me a troublemaker and accusing me of manipulating Mama during a vulnerable time. Jerome left a voicemail explaining that family relationships were more important than money, and that I was being unnecessarily divisive. Candace sent a long, rambling email about how disappointed she was in my behavior and how I was tearing the family apart over finances. Tommy, predictably, showed up at my apartment unannounced. I opened the door to find him standing on my landing, looking disheveled and agitated. His usual charm was nowhere to be found, replaced by an aggressive energy that made me glad I lived above a business where other people were usually around. "We need to talk," he said, pushing past me into my small living room without waiting for an invitation. "Hello to you too, Tommy," I said, closing the door but leaving it unlocked. "What can I do for you?" "You can stop whatever game you're playing with Mama," he said, spinning around to face me. "This whole thing with the loans and the guilt trips about money, it's cruel, Opal. Mama doesn't need this stress at her age." I walked to my kitchen and poured myself a glass of water, taking my time to respond. Tommy's strategy had always been to overwhelm people with intensity until they gave him what he wanted. But I was no longer interested in being overwhelmed. "What stress exactly?" I asked calmly. "The stress of her own children acknowledging that they owe her money, The stress of being treated with the basic respect that comes with having your debts honored? She never asked us to pay her back, Tommy said, his voice rising. She gave us that money freely. She wanted to help us. She loaned you that money, I corrected. There's a difference between a gift and a loan, and Mama kept detailed records that make it very clear which category your money fell into. Tommy began pacing my small living room like a caged animal. You don't understand the pressure I've been under. You don't know what it's like trying to establish a career, trying to make something of yourself in a competitive world. That money from Mama made the difference between success and failure for me. And what about Mama's success? What about her financial security? What about her ability to enjoy her retirement without worrying about money, because she gave away $57,000 to children who forgot to pay her back? She has enough money, Tommy said dismissively. She sold the house for more than she expected. She's moving to that fancy senior place. She's fine. I stared at him in amazement. She has enough money because she's selling her home, Tommy. She's liquidating her assets to pay for her future care because her children depleted her savings. Do you not see the connection there? You're being dramatic, he said, waving his hand as if my concerns were meaningless. Besides, this isn't really about the money, is it? This is about you feeling left out of the family. This is about you being jealous that the rest of us have built successful lives while you're still working at a hardware store. The insult hung in the air between us like a toxic cloud. There it was, the truth they all believed but rarely said out loud. That I was jealous of their success. That my objections to their behavior came from envy rather than principle. That my simple life made me somehow lesser than them, more deserving of exploitation, less worthy of consideration. You're right, I said quietly. I am still working at a hardware store. Do you know why, Tommy? Because you didn't apply yourself in school. Because you chose the easy path instead of challenging yourself. Because I gave up my college fund to help support the family when Daddy left. Because I've spent 25 years giving my money to siblings who needed help with emergencies, tuition, business ventures, and life crises. Because every time I've tried to save money for my own future, someone in this family has had a catastrophe that required my savings account. I walked closer to him, my voice remaining steady despite the anger building in my chest. I'm 42 years old with no retirement savings, no emergency fund, and no financial security because I've been funding everyone else's dreams while putting my own on hold. So yes, I'm working at a hardware store. But not because I lack ambition, or intelligence, or drive. Because I've been sacrificing those things for a family that sees my sacrifices as evidence of my limitations rather than proof of my love. Tommy had stopped pacing and was staring at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. For a moment, I thought maybe my words had gotten through to him. Maybe he was finally understanding the cost of his family's selfishness. Then he spoke, and I realized I'd been naive to hope for genuine comprehension. Look, I'm sorry you feel like you've missed out on things, he said in a tone that managed to be both condescending and dismissive. But that was your choice, Opal. Nobody forced you to help us. Nobody asked you to be the family martyr. Family martyr. The phrase hit me like a slap, but it also crystallized something I'd been struggling to articulate about my role in the family dysfunction. You're absolutely right, I said, surprising him with my agreement. Nobody forced me to help. I chose to help because I thought family members were supposed to support each other. I chose to sacrifice because I believed that love meant putting other people's needs ahead of your own sometimes. I chose to give and give and give because I thought eventually that generosity would be recognized, appreciated, and reciprocated. I sat down on my couch, suddenly feeling exhausted by the weight of my own revelations. But you know what I've learned, Tommy? I've learned that there's a difference between being generous and being used. I've learned that love isn't supposed to be one-sided. I've learned that respect has to be mutual, or it's not really respect at all. So what? You're just going to abandon the family because we didn't thank you enough? I'm not abandoning anyone. I'm just done being the only one who sacrifices. I'm done being the only one who gives without receiving. I'm done being treated like my dreams don't matter while I fund everyone else's. Tommy sank into my armchair, his aggressive energy finally depleting into something that looked like genuine confusion. But what about family loyalty? What about sticking together through thick and thin? What about it, Tommy? When was the last time any of you stuck with me through thick and thin? When was the last time any of you prioritized my needs over your own convenience? When was the last time any of you made a sacrifice for my benefit? The questions hung in the air unanswered, because we both knew the answers. The family loyalty I'd been practicing for decades had been entirely unidirectional. The sticking together had involved me sticking to them while they moved freely through their lives, secure in the knowledge that I'd always be there to catch them when they fell. I don't know what you want from us, Tommy said finally. I want you to pay Mama back the money you owe her. I want you to treat her with the respect that comes with honoring your debts. I want you to acknowledge that being family doesn't give you the right to take advantage of people who love you. And if we don't, I looked at this man who was my baby brother, this person I'd helped raise and protect and support for 30 years, and I felt something I'd never felt before, complete indifference to his problems. Then you don't, I said simply. But don't call me when your next crisis hits. Don't expect me to solve problems you create for yourselves. Don't assume I'll be there to cushion your falls while you continue to exploit the woman who raised us. Tommy left without another word, and I spent the evening in my quiet apartment, marveling at how peaceful life could be when you weren't constantly bracing for the next family emergency. The peace lasted until the weekend, when I received a call from Mama that made my blood pressure spike immediately. Opal Jean, she said, her voice strained and tired. I need to tell you what happened today. What's wrong, Mama? Marcus and Denise came to visit me at the new apartment. They brought flowers and took me out to lunch, and they were so sweet and attentive. But then they started talking about the money situation. My stomach dropped. What did they say? They said you'd been filling my head with ideas about repayment and making me think they were taking advantage of me. They said families shouldn't keep score about money, and that asking them to pay back loans would put financial strain on them when they're trying to build their futures. I closed my eyes, feeling the familiar surge of rage that came with watching my siblings manipulate Mama's generous nature. They said they were hurt that I would even consider asking for repayment, especially since they've been so good to me over the years. Marcus reminded me about all the times he's helped me with computer problems, and Denise talked about how she's always included me in her social events. Computer problems and social events. They were comparing technical support and party invitations to $57,000 in unpaid loans. What did you tell them, Mama? I told them I needed to think about it. But Opal, they seemed so upset. Denise actually started crying, saying she couldn't afford to pay me back right now because of her business expenses. Marcus said asking for repayment would force him to choose between his family obligations and his business growth. The manipulation was breathtaking in its audacity. They were making Mama feel guilty for wanting her own money back. They were positioning themselves as the victims of her unreasonable financial expectations. Mama, I said carefully, do you remember what you told me about family love not being supposed to be one-sided? Yes, but do you think it's one-sided for them to borrow money they can't afford to repay? Do you think it's one-sided for them to make you feel guilty about wanting financial security in your retirement? They said they'll pay me back eventually when their situations improve. When, Mama? Marcus's oldest loan is from 2018. His situation has improved significantly since then. He's driving a new truck and taking vacations and buying expensive electronics. His situation has improved, but his debt to you hasn't. There was a long pause before Mama spoke again. They said you were trying to turn me against them. They said you were being vindictive because you're unhappy with your own life. The accusation shouldn't have surprised me, but it still stung. Of course they'd found a way to make me the villain in this story. Of course they'd convinced Mama that protecting her interests was somehow an attack on them. Mama, I want you to do something for me, I said. I want you to call your bank and ask them about setting up automatic payments from each of your children's accounts to yours. Small amounts, maybe $50 or $100 a month per person. Then I want you to see how quickly they'll agree to that arrangement. Oh, I couldn't do that, Mama said immediately. That would be too confrontational. More confrontational than asking a 73-year-old woman to choose between her financial security and her relationships with her children? Another pause. I just don't want to cause problems in the family, Mama said finally. The problems already exist, Mama. I'm just the only one talking about them. That conversation haunted me for days. I realized that my siblings had found the perfect strategy to avoid accountability. They'd convinced Mama that expecting repayment was somehow harmful to the family, that asking for her money back was greedy and divisive. They'd turned the situation completely around, making her feel guilty for wanting what was rightfully hers. But I also realized something else. I'd done all I could do. I'd exposed the truth. I'd supported Mama's autonomy. I'd drawn my boundaries and stuck to them. Whether or not my siblings chose to behave ethically was no longer my responsibility to control or my failure to manage. The final test of my new resolve came in April, exactly 1 month after Mama had moved into Sunset Gardens. I was at work, helping a customer choose the right size bolts for a deck repair, when my phone rang with a call from Jerome. I almost didn't answer. The old me would have dropped everything to take a family call, but the new me had learned that family emergencies were rarely actual emergencies, just failures of planning that became someone else's responsibility to solve. But something about the timing felt different, so I told the customer I'd be right back and stepped outside to take the call. Opal, thank God you answered, Jerome said, his voice tight with panic. We need you to get to Riverside Medical right away. Mama's been in an accident. The world tilted sideways. What kind of accident? Is she okay? She fell in the parking lot at Sunset Gardens and hit her head. She's conscious, but they're doing tests to check for internal injuries. Can you meet us at the hospital? Of course, I said, already heading to my car. How long ago did this happen? About an hour ago. Marcus and Denise are already on their way. I'm driving up from Atlanta now. I made the 40-minute drive to Riverside Medical in 25 minutes, my heart pounding the entire time. Despite everything that had happened with my family, despite all the anger and disappointment and boundary setting, Mama was still the most important person in my life. The thought of losing her, especially right after she'd finally started living for herself, was unbearable. I found Marcus and Denise in the emergency room waiting area, both looking genuinely worried and frightened. For a moment, seeing them scared and vulnerable, I felt the old familiar urge to comfort them, to be the strong one who held everyone together during a crisis. How is she? I asked, sitting down beside Denise. The doctors are still running tests, Marcus said. She's awake and talking, which is good, but they're concerned about possible concussion or internal bleeding. How did it happen? Apparently she was coming back from dinner at the dining hall and slipped on some wet pavement, Denise explained. One of the other residents saw her fall and called for help. We sat in tense silence for several minutes, the family conflicts of recent weeks temporarily set aside in the face of genuine concern for Mama's health. It almost felt like old times, the four of us united in our worry for the woman who'd raised us. Then the doctor came out to speak with us, and everything changed. Mrs. Harris is going to be fine, Dr. Patterson said, addressing our worried group. She has a mild concussion and some bruising, but no serious injuries. We'd like to keep her overnight for observation, but she should be able to go home tomorrow. The relief in the waiting room was palpable. Denise actually started crying, and Marcus let out a long breath he'd apparently been holding. I felt my own shoulders relax for the first time since Jerome's phone call. Can we see her? I asked. She's resting now, but you can visit briefly in about an hour, Dr. Patterson said. I should mention, though, that she's been asking specifically for Opal. She seems particularly concerned about making sure you know she's okay. The comment was innocent enough, but I saw Marcus and Denise exchange a look that I recognized from childhood. It was the look they shared when they felt like I was getting attention that should have been distributed more equally among the siblings. Of course she's asking for Opal, Marcus said with a bitter laugh after the doctor left. Opal's her favorite now. I'm not her favorite, I said quietly. I'm just the one who's been supporting her decisions instead of fighting them. Right, Denise said, her relief about Mama's condition apparently giving way to her ongoing resentment about the loan situation. You're the perfect daughter who never does anything wrong. I stared at her in amazement. Even here, even now, even in a hospital waiting room after Mama's accident, they couldn't resist taking shots at me for supporting Mama's autonomy and financial security. I'm the daughter who shows up, I said simply. I'm the daughter who prioritizes her needs over my own convenience. I'm the daughter who treats her with the respect that comes with honoring your debts to the woman who raised you. Here we go again with the money, Marcus said, his voice rising enough to attract attention from other families in the waiting room. Can't you give it a rest for one day? Mama just had an accident, and you're still harping about loans. I'm not harping about loans. You're the ones who brought up favorites and perfect daughters. I'm just pointing out that being supportive of Mama's choices doesn't make me her favorite. It makes me her ally. Against us, Denise accused. You've turned her against her own children. The accusation was so absurd that I almost laughed. I've turned her against you. You've turned yourselves against her by treating her like a bank that never expects repayment. You've made her feel guilty for wanting financial security in her retirement. You've prioritized your own comfort over her well-being. That's not true, Marcus protested, but his voice lacked conviction. Isn't it? When was the last time any of you visited her just to spend time with her? Not because you needed something. When was the last time you called her just to chat, not to share news or ask for help? When was the last time you prioritized her happiness over your own preferences? The silence that followed was answer enough. Jerome arrived while we were waiting to see Mama, and he immediately tried to play peacekeeper between his feuding siblings. Can we please not do this here? He asked. Can we please just focus on Mama and save the family drama for later? There wouldn't be family drama if everyone just treated Mama with basic respect, I said. And there wouldn't be family drama if you stopped trying to control everyone's relationship with her, Denise shot back. I'm not trying to control anything. I'm trying to protect a 73-year-old woman from being financially exploited by her own children. Exploited? Jerome looked genuinely confused. What are you talking about? I realized that despite the confrontation at the house, Jerome still didn't fully understand the scope of what my siblings had taken from Mama. He knew about his own loans, but he didn't grasp the bigger picture of systematic financial exploitation. Your brothers and sisters owe Mama $57,000 in unpaid loans, I said quietly. Money she lent them over the years to help with their careers, their homes, their emergencies. Money she can't afford to lose on a fixed income. Money they've decided they don't need to pay back because families shouldn't keep score. Jerome's face went pale. $57,000? $57,000 that could pay for years of assisted living if Mama ever needs it. $57,000 that could cover medical emergencies or home modifications or any of the expenses that come with aging. $57,000 that her children borrowed and then forgot about. I didn't forget about my loans, Jerome said defensively. I didn't realize everyone else had borrowed so much. I thought maybe I owed a few thousand, not part of $57,000. The amount doesn't matter, Marcus interrupted. What matters is that she gave us that money willingly. She wanted to help us. She loaned you that money, I corrected, for what felt like the 100th time. And she documented it as loans because she expected repayment eventually. She didn't give away her retirement savings as gifts. She invested them in her children with the expectation that the investment would be returned. Before anyone could respond, a nurse appeared to tell us that Mama was ready for visitors. We filed into her room in uncomfortable silence, our family conflict temporarily suspended in the presence of the woman we were arguing about. Mama looked small and fragile in the hospital bed, with a bandage on her forehead and bruises along her arm. But her eyes were alert, and she smiled when she saw us all gathered together. Look at all my babies, she said, her voice soft but clear. You didn't need to come rushing down here. I'm fine. We were scared, Mama, Denise said, taking her hand. When Jerome called and said you'd been in an accident. Just a little tumble, Mama said dismissively. The pavement was wet, and these old legs aren't as steady as they used to be. But the doctors say I'll be good as new. We spent the next hour taking turns talking with Mama, sharing updates about our lives, and listening to her stories about adjusting to life at Sunset Gardens. For brief moments, it felt like we were a normal family having a normal hospital visit, united in our concern and relief. But as visiting hours came to an end and we prepared to leave, Mama asked to speak with me privately. "Opal Jean," she said after the others had gone to get coffee, "I need to tell you something about the money situation." My stomach tensed. "What about it?" "I've been thinking about what Marcus and Denise said when they visited last week. About how asking for repayment would strain their finances and damage our relationships." I felt my heart sink. After everything we'd discussed, after all the evidence of their financial exploitation, was Mama really going to let them off the hook? "And I realized something," Mama continued. "I realized that they're right about one thing. Asking for repayment would damage our relationships. But not because asking is wrong, because it would force them to face the truth about how they've been treating me." I blinked in surprise. "What do you mean?" "I mean that loving children don't make their elderly mother choose between her financial security and their approval. Loving children don't borrow money they can't afford to repay. Loving children don't make their mother feel guilty for wanting to be treated with basic financial respect." Mama's voice was steady and clear, with no trace of the uncertainty I'd heard during her phone call about Marcus and Denise's visit. "I'm going to ask them for repayment plans," she said firmly. "Monthly payments that fit their budgets but acknowledge their debts. And if they refuse, or if they make me feel guilty for asking, then I'll know exactly what kind of children I raised." "Mama, are you sure? I don't want you to feel pressured because of what I said about the loans." "You didn't pressure me, baby. You opened my eyes. I've been so afraid of being a burden to my children that I let them burden me instead. I've been so worried about being seen as greedy or demanding that I let them take advantage of my generosity." She squeezed my hand with surprising strength. "I'm 73 years old, Opal Jean. I don't have time to keep enabling my children's selfishness while sacrificing my own security. And I don't have time to pretend that love doesn't require respect." I left the hospital that night feeling something I hadn't experienced in years. Hope. Hope that Mama would finally stand up for herself. Hope that my siblings might actually face consequences for their behavior. Hope that our family dysfunction might finally be addressed instead of ignored. The reckoning came faster than I'd expected. 3 days after Mama was released from the hospital, I received a group text from her, asking all of her children to come to her apartment at Sunset Gardens for a family meeting. The message was polite but firm, with a tone that reminded me of the woman who'd raised 6 children without accepting excuses or negotiating with manipulators. I arrived at Sunset Gardens to find my siblings already gathered in Mama's small but comfortable living room. The tension was immediately apparent. Marcus sat rigid in his chair, clearly prepared for battle. Denise looked like she was trying to appear calm while internally planning her defense strategy. Jerome seemed nervous and uncomfortable. Tommy kept checking his phone as if hoping for an urgent call that would require him to leave. Mama entered the room carrying a folder that I recognized immediately. The loan documentation. She'd organized it all into individual packets, one for each sibling, with payment schedules and current balance calculations. "I asked you all here today because I have something important to discuss," Mama began, her voice steady and authoritative. "Over the past several years, I've loaned significant amounts of money to each of you to help with various life expenses. The total amount outstanding is $57,000. She paused to let that number sink in before continuing. "I've prepared individual repayment schedules for each of you, with monthly payment amounts that should fit comfortably within your current budgets. I'm not asking for immediate payment in full. I'm asking for acknowledgement of these debts and commitment to gradual repayment." The silence in the room was deafening. My siblings exchanged glances, clearly trying to determine who would be the first to object. Marcus broke first. "Mama, we talked about this. We agreed that family doesn't keep score about money." "No, Marcus," Mama replied calmly. "You told me that family doesn't keep score about money. I never agreed to anything. And I've realized that while I haven't been keeping score, I have been keeping records. Records that show a pattern of taking without giving back." She handed out the individual packets, and I watched my siblings' faces as they reviewed their payment schedules. The amounts were reasonable, $50 to $100 per month per person, with slightly higher payments for those who owed more or earned more. "These payment amounts are insulting," Denise said, looking up from her packet. "You're treating us like strangers who owe you money instead of your children, who've always been grateful for your help." If you've always been grateful, then you should have no problem showing that gratitude by repaying what you owe, Mama responded. This is ridiculous, Tommy said, tossing his packet onto the coffee table. I'm not going to pay my own mother back for money she gave me willingly. It's weird and transactional, and completely inappropriate for family relationships. What's inappropriate? Mama said, her voice taking on an edge I remembered from childhood disciplinary moments, is borrowing money from your elderly mother and then acting like repayment is optional. What's inappropriate is making me feel guilty for wanting financial security in my retirement. Jerome was studying his payment schedule with a furrowed brow. Mama, I honestly thought some of these amounts were gifts. I didn't realize you were expecting repayment on everything. If they were gifts, Jerome, I wouldn't have documented them as loans with specific amounts and dates. I wouldn't have kept records of missed payment promises and excuses. But the amounts seem so formal, Candace protested. It feels like you're charging us interest or something. I'm not charging interest, Mama said. I'm asking for the principal amounts back, spread over reasonable time periods. If these were loans from a bank, you'd be paying interest. If these were credit card debts, you'd be paying fees and penalties. I'm asking for far less than any financial institution would demand. Marcus stood up abruptly, his composure finally cracking. I can't believe you're doing this. I can't believe you're treating your own children like deadbeat borrowers. I'm treating you like adults who are responsible for their debts, Mama replied evenly. If that feels like being treated as deadbeats, perhaps you should examine why. This is Opal's influence, Denise accused, pointing at me. She's poisoned you against us. She's made you think we're taking advantage of you when all we've ever done is accept the help you offered. I started to respond, but Mama held up her hand to stop me. Opal didn't poison me against anyone, she said firmly. Opal opened my eyes to the fact that I've been enabling financial irresponsibility while compromising my own security. Opal helped me realize that love and respect have to go both ways. So what happens if we refuse? Tommy asked defiantly. What if we just say no? Mama looked at him with an expression that was both sad and resolute. Then you'll have made your choice about what kind of children you want to be, and I'll make my choice about what kind of mother I'm going to be going forward. You're threatening to cut us off? Marcus asked, his voice rising. I'm telling you that I'm done being taken advantage of by people who claim to love me. I'm done sacrificing my financial security for children who can't be bothered to honor their debts to me. I'm done enabling selfish behavior because I'm afraid of being seen as difficult. The room erupted in angry voices, with my siblings talking over each other in their rush to express outrage, hurt feelings, and accusations of unfairness. But through it all, Mama remained calm and unmoved. Finally, she stood up and said in a voice that cut through all the noise, Enough. The room fell silent. I've made my position clear, she said. I expect monthly payments starting next month. I expect acknowledgement that these are legitimate debts that need to be repaid. I expect to be treated with the respect that comes with honoring your financial obligations to the woman who raised you. She moved toward the door of her apartment, clearly indicating that the meeting was over. If you choose to pay, we'll continue to have the kind of relationship we've always had. If you choose not to pay, we'll have a different kind of relationship. The choice is yours. One by one, my siblings filed out of Mama's apartment, their faces displaying various combinations of anger, shock, and hurt feelings. I lingered behind, wanting to make sure Mama was okay after such a difficult confrontation. How are you feeling? I asked when we were alone. Proud of myself, she said without hesitation. For the first time in years, I feel proud of the way I handled my own children. Any regrets? Only that I waited so long to demand the respect I deserved. Over the following weeks, I watched with fascination as my siblings dealt with Mama's ultimatum. Their responses revealed more about their character than years of family gatherings ever had. Jerome was the first to cave. Within a week, he'd set up automatic monthly payments and called Mama to apologize for not taking the loan seriously. I never thought about it from your perspective, he admitted. I was so focused on my own financial struggles that I didn't consider yours. Candace followed suit after 2 weeks, though her compliance came with a long speech about how hurt she was by Mama's approach and how family relationships shouldn't be reduced to financial transactions. But she made her first payment. Tommy held out for a month before finally agreeing to a modified payment plan that took his lower income into account. He never apologized, but he did start calling Mama more frequently, as if increased communication could compensate for his earlier resistance. Marcus and Denise were a different story entirely. Both of them called Mama multiple times, trying to negotiate reduced payment amounts or extended timelines. Both of them recruited their spouses to call and advocate on their behalf. Both of them tried emotional manipulation, financial excuses, and outright defiance. When none of those strategies worked, they tried a different approach. They attempted to turn the rest of the family against Mama's decision. I received a call from Marcus's wife, complaining that Mama was causing financial hardship for their family. Denise sent me text messages asking me to convince Mama to be more reasonable about repayment timelines. Both of them tried to organize family interventions where everyone would gang up on Mama to pressure her into backing down. But for the first time in our family's history, their manipulation tactics didn't work. Jerome refused to participate in undermining Mama's position. Candace, despite her hurt feelings, acknowledged that the debts were legitimate. Tommy stayed out of the drama entirely. And I made it clear that I supported Mama's right to expect repayment. Without a unified family front against her, without the ability to make her feel guilty for standing up for herself, Marcus and Denise found themselves isolated in their defiance. The breaking point came 3 months after Mama's ultimatum. Marcus and Denise had missed every payment deadline, ignored every follow-up call, and dismissed every attempt at compromise. Mama made a decision that shocked everyone, including me. She hired a lawyer. The letter from Patterson and Associates arrived at Marcus's business and Denise's real estate office on the same day. It was professional, polite, and absolutely devastating. It outlined the loan amounts, the documented payment agreements, the missed payment deadlines, and the legal options available for debt collection. The letter didn't threaten immediate legal action, but it made clear that continued non-payment would result in formal debt collection proceedings, which could include wage garnishment, asset seizure, and damaged credit ratings. My phone rang within an hour of the letters being delivered. "How could you let her do this?" Denise screamed before I'd even said hello. "How could you let your own mother hire lawyers to go after her children?" "I didn't let her do anything," I replied calmly. "Mama makes her own decisions about her own finances. This is insane, Opal. She's threatening to sue us over money she gave us willingly. She's threatening to collect debts you've refused to acknowledge or repay. There's a difference. We're family." Denise's voice cracked with what sounded like genuine distress. "Family doesn't sue each other over money, and family doesn't steal from each other either," I said. "But that didn't stop you from taking $57,000 and pretending it was a gift." The conversation devolved from there, with Denise accusing me of destroying the family, and me pointing out that she'd destroyed it herself by choosing her financial convenience over her mother's security. Marcus's call came an hour later, and it was even uglier. He accused me of elder abuse, claimed I was manipulating Mama for my own benefit, and threatened to file for guardianship to protect her from my influence. "Go ahead," I said when he finished his rant. "Get a judge to examine Mama's mental capacity and decision-making abilities. Get a court-appointed advocate to review her financial situation and her children's debt obligations. Get a neutral third party to evaluate whether asking for loan repayment constitutes abuse or responsible financial management." The threat was empty, and we both knew it. No judge would find anything inappropriate about a 73-year-old woman asking her adult children to repay legitimate debts. No court would consider debt collection to be elder abuse when the debts were well documented, and the payment requests were reasonable. Marcus never followed through on his guardianship threat, but he did follow through on cutting off all contact with Mama and me. Denise quickly followed suit. Within 6 months, both had hired attorneys and settled their debts rather than face public legal proceedings. Today, I run my own successful hardware store. Mama enjoys her retirement with financial security intact. 3 of my siblings learned respect. 2 learned consequences. Sometimes the best way to love your family is to stop letting them treat you like garbage. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.